Welcome to Successful Parenting, where we, Jackie Rue and Robin Choquette, share practical skills for families to build resilience and healthy connections. As practicing professionals and parents ourselves, we hope this podcast is a resource for parents to grow, reflect, and learn more about themselves and their children. Our approach is simple, tangible, and most importantly, we lead with compassion for the integrity of the families we serve. This podcast should not be taken as medical advice and is intended for informational purposes only. We love our work, and we can't wait to watch families gain confidence and open themselves up to new ways of successful parenting.
Good morning, Robin. Happy Saturday morning. How you doing?
I am good. How about you?
I'm doing good. I've been awake for a couple hours. It's a sunny morning. We have one of my favorites that are on our episode today, so I'm feeling great. How are you?
I am excited to see Lauren. So I want to tell you the story that happened this week with my granddaughter. They had a career day and you had to dress like what you want to be when you grow up. And she wants to be a teacher. And her teacher had told her that she has an old lanyard that she would let her borrow that day. She wore the lanyard all day. And then at the end of the day, she goes up to the teacher and she takes it off and she kind of whips it down on the desk and says, I quit. I can't take all of these students. They're driving me crazy. And the teacher lost it, was laughing. Because I'm sure they feel like that. Yeah, I thought it was cute that my granddaughter played that one out.
It's funny, and I do think that happens. We all have our breaking points, right? I mean, as much as we all care about kids, that we all have our breaking points. And I'm excited to introduce Lauren Bilbrey. Lauren and I have been kind of considered the dynamic duo. We have partnered together with hundreds of students. We do great and we do amazing work with students that, others have a hard time with, whether it's kids having a hard time with homework, having a hard time with confidence in school, having a hard time motivated with school, behavior challenges, emotional challenges, which at some point, let's be honest, all kids have. I don't know that I've ever met a child in my life that has just breezed through, childhood and adolescence without any issues. I think as much as we love our kids, they all struggle at points, and that's no indicator of success. But
absolutely,
what I love about Lauren is there's no child that she ever gives up on, right? There's a will, there's a way, and we kind of figure out what the child needs, what's the need behind the behavior, how does the child connect best, and I'm excited because Lauren is the one person I've met that can pretty much reach any kid. A lot of times I handle the social emotional and she handles the education, but there's a huge crossover. So I'm excited to introduce Lauren. She provides educational services privately, but she also oversees the educational program at Ascension-Alexian Health and has been in education for a long time. And really, you won't meet someone that doesn't think that she's just amazing.
Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you. Good morning. It's so good to be here.
What would you say, Lauren? What would you say to our listeners just in terms of what you consider to be your experience and history working with students?
So my experience is not traditional, which if you would have asked me a long time ago what my path would have been, I would have told you I would have gone to school and then I would have just taught in a school and then I'd be done. And it did not go that way, really. So originally I was an English teacher. So I double majored in English and education. Then I went back and got my learning behavior specialist, and then I went back again and got my master's in special ed. But I did teach English in the high school level first originally, but I spent most of my time in the dean's office, my attendance office. Oh, yeah. And because exactly what you said is all those at-risk kids were my kids. And so if something was going on or someone didn't show up to school, even when I was student teaching, I was like, nope, we got to find this kid. So now when I look back, I'm like, oh yeah, this really makes sense. Because after I taught at the high school and the middle school level, even in the middle school level, I got into working with the truancy officer and gang intervention and going to the projects and working with the families. And I was like, I still need more. So I came back to the district I originally worked in and then worked at the therapeutic day school and then the alternative high school at night too. And those were adults, which I still call them my kids, but they were divorced from the school system and they were coming back to seek their high school diploma. So I would teach all day and then go to a different high school at night and teach kids or adults who were 17 and above. I mean, at one time I had a 78-year-old grandma in the same class as her nephew. As her grandson, and she went back to school so they could graduate at the same time.
I love it.
It was very cool. Yeah, it was very, very cool. So I kind of went down like a weeds pathway of what could I do? What's more? I kind of am always just hungry, and then ended up at the hospital, like So I sat on the other side, in those meetings when kids were hospitalized, and I was the teacher, and then went to the other side, and the hospital was like, "How about you come be the teacher at the hospital?" And it's like, "Huh, I hadn't thought about that." So now it's been 11 years that I've been overseeing the education department at the hospital. So that's kind of the pathway I took. I was always kind of a teacher, and it was funny because it all started with dance classes, honestly, back in the day. I was huge into ballet, but I kind of always had a knack for understanding how people worked and how I could make things better for them, and then got into coaching and did it really early, even when I was still in high school, and then in college too. So it was just a different platform for teaching people, but it all made sense. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Did you always know? Because that's one thing we've talked about. It seems like a lot of times teachers will say that they kind of always had the sense of they knew they wanted to work with others, just love teaching. Was that something
Mhm.
that you knew at an early age? And did you play the teacher, with
Uh-huh.
your stuffed animals and your dolls and all of that?
I don't know about that. I'd have to ask my mom, but teaching was always in my family, so it was always around me. My mom was a teacher.
Okay.
Um, so she was kindergarten, like really young, which I've taught everything, but I'm like, oh no, give me the kids who are going to swear at me, walk out of school, or throw something. Like that's definitely my population, or kids who are super shut down, even too. But the little tiny ones, like my mom did, I'm like, I don't know, that takes a special person. But I was always around it. So I think that like nurturing behavior was always modeled for me. So that was pretty just seamless into my own life. But yeah, when I was around people, I would always want to help them. Or if they were struggling, I'd be like, maybe you should try it this way. And my approach towards people, I think, was always kind of structured and nice, but also kind of firm. So let's make a difference type of situation. But when I went to college, I was declared when I went in. So, a lot of
Okay.
people go in and they're like, I'm not sure. I knew right from the get go that I was going to be a teacher. So, yeah.
Would you say your mom influenced that? Who was that person, or was it more than your mom that really influenced that love?
I would think it was my mom because I spent the most time with my mom because of being in the car or on a train, going to dance class in different studios. Mom and I just talked a ton. But even my dad, like one of the memories I remember when I was little is when I would get home from dance class finally, my dad would come home from work and we would eat dinner together at 10 p.m. And he would ask me, how was your day? Or like, what happened? What did the teacher say today? Or what's something I should know? And it wasn't phrased as like, how was it? And I said good, and that was the end of the story. He always pressed a little bit and all about the education piece of it. So I think it was both of them, honestly, at the same time, just in their own ways. Always wanting more, always wanting to know what happened, always wanting to know something good or something bad. How could they help? So I think both were an equal part.
Well, and I think one thing that I love about you, Lauren, is that when kids give up, you don't give up on them. And so often, we talk a lot about there's always a need behind what we see. If a child's shutting down, if a child's giving up, if a child's refusing, there's a need. We talk a lot about, kids are having a hard time, not trying to give us a hard time. And so I think you and I align with that. When kids start to really fall apart, that's when we come in and really kind of work with
Mm-hmm.
them, not against them. And I think that's where, your approach, our approach is so different than others. I think we
Mm-hmm.
don't look at it as, oh God, these kids are such a pain. We look at it as these kids are struggling, and kids are going to struggle. And I think we're seeing that, since the pandemic, and even before we were seeing it, but that's really the truth that's going on today. And so, if parents
Mm-hmm.
are listening and kids are struggling, it's not so much about kind of fretting about it, but looking at it as an opportunity to kind of teach them how to start to work through that. And those, times of struggle can actually be times of opportunity.
For sure. And a lot of kids say, you have to deal with us all the time. And my
Right.
answer to that is always, I'm not dealing with you. I really like to be here.
Right.
And they look at you kind of like tilt their head, like, what do you mean? And it's like, don't use that verbiage because it's not true. But they're not used to that. They think that all teachers are going to react to them the same way. So a lot of times when they are in that stage that you're talking about, they're like, well, I hate all teachers. So then it's a challenge to me because I'm like, oh, you're not going to hate me. Like, let's go. But it's an approach. If they're really struggling, it's like you said, you have to figure out what the root is. And I had a really good teacher in college that said, kids don't do things for no reason. And that has always stuck with me. And it turns it into a puzzle piece for me that I want to make them all fit together because there's a reason. So if they're doing something, we got to figure out what the reason is. And if they need attention, then they probably need connection. So we have to figure that piece out too. It's so much more than a kid's acting up in class or a kid who's shut down in class. That's not it. That's what you see. That's the loud behavior or the quiet one that you can visualize, but that's not actually what's going on.
Well, Lauren, one of the questions, I do a ton of teacher presentations and a ton of presentations to teachers. And I've been asking recently, do your students believe they can be successful when they're coming to school? And you know the answer. Most of the teachers tell me, no, our students don't believe that they can be successful. And I've said, even the last couple schools I've talked to, I've said, well, what percentage of students do you think? Let's just take a guess. What would you say? What percentage do you think of students that you have in your school buildings believe they can be successful? And they say 40, 50%. And what's interesting about that is I say to them, like, well, if you're a student and you don't believe you can be successful in an environment, how much are you going to really engage? And we talk about if you have a student struggling to engage or to be motivated in school, do they believe that they can really succeed in that environment? And if the answer is no, how do we kind of pivot and shift on that?
Yeah, and it's huge. I mean, everyone asks, I can't do this. It's immediate. I'm going to fail, right? Like that's the first thing I see. I'm going to fail. Well, what makes you think you're going to fail? And it could be because of the history of something that they've gone through, but it could also just be because it's anxiety, that's how it comes out and that's how they verbalize it. But it could also just be they don't know how to be good learners either. And that's the thing I'm finding is that we expect them to know how to learn. But if you actually look at them and say, do you know how to break this down for yourself? Do you know how to wrap your head around this? They'll look at you shocked at first because you asked them that question. And then they'll say, no. And there's so many gaps right now. So I think we have to look at it and figure out what can we do at home? What can we do as teachers? What can we do as administrators or social workers or whatever your practice might be to kind of wrap around these kids and figure out where those gaps are and how to fill them and then work together to do it too, because it's not a one person job right now. Right now it's taken a village. Like that line is true right now for sure.
One, it's interesting. And I was talking to somebody earlier, as a kid, I was not successful in school when I was in elementary and middle school, but school was, if you can imagine, Lauren, sitting 8 hours a day in a Catholic school in a desk was not my fave.
Not your thing.
I did not do well at it. It was just a total mess. But when I took standardized test scores, what they found is I was scoring like 98 percentile, 100, but then they couldn't figure out, you had this kid that's like failing, but then she's scoring like 98 percentile on tests. And finally, when I got to high school, it balanced out because they figured out like, it's not that this kid can't learn. It's that this kid isn't like meant to sit for 8 hours a day with a boring teacher, and I hate to say that, but at that time, there's not all kids are meant for the same school environment, which we've been talking about. But more recently, what's come up a lot since the pandemic is this notion of homework. During the pandemic, many schools shut down and many children and teens homework got blurred. And now that we're back to in-person learning, many families have reached out to us and said, you need to help us. We're having a hard time getting our kids to be motivated to do homework. Our kids are stressed by homework. They can't take it. Let's talk about that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge right now is that homework kind of went to the wayside, like you said, because we had to prioritize what we were going to teach and how we were going to do it in an electronic format over Zoom. So all of a sudden it was like, well, we don't care about the homework piece. The problem with that is that that's the part where they learn the most about themselves, because some of them have to practice independence to do it. And other kids may have had a gap because people were working or doing whatever and they needed support and then they didn't have it. So they didn't have structure during the day that they needed because they weren't physically in the classroom. And then it didn't change. They're still at home at night trying to do homework. So now we're asking these kids who haven't been in school really for the last couple of years to go back to how it used to be. And a lot of them are at a critical age and they don't know how to do it. So I would tell parents the biggest thing is structure and consistency. If you can provide it for your child and you can set a time and set a place in your home, and if the home doesn't work, then think about going outside of the house if they're older for sure. Like, can they walk to the library? Can they go to Starbucks and actually concentrate? Can they put music on and just go to the park? Can they do things for themselves that the environment works better for them? Because if the environment doesn't work, they're not going to focus. It's not going to happen. So I would start there. And then break it down to the easy things that you and I think are easy are not easy for these kids anymore. Those executive functioning skills they're not there. And they don't even know that they're not there, but that's really hard for them to self-start or have control over, like flexible thinking, where I'm going to fail or I'm going to do well, or I can't remember this thing, or how do I plan my time around this to make sure this due date is hit. and they just really need support. And I think parents get overwhelmed because they think it's so much. But a lot of the times it's very simple, small things you can do, like check in with your child, set them up at the dining room table if that's the most comfortable spot, get rid of distractions, don't have their phone on them, walk through their classes with them. Maybe they have a question about something that they won't tell you about unless you ask, and then check in. You don't have to even hover, but you need to just check in and kind of have an accountability piece over them because they actually need that structure. And a lot of parents think that they don't want it. And even if kids say they don't want it or they get mad, it's okay if they get mad. You know, you want them to be healthy. They don't always have to be happy, but they do need some support and someone just there.
You
with
want to hear
them.
something funny, Lauren? This is
Mm.
something that I had a realization a couple months ago, and I've talked to many parents about it, and we've kind of laughed. I have a saying that I've kind of come up with, and I think you'll agree. Homework doesn't stress kids out. Homework stresses families out. Homework
Parents out.
stresses parents out. You know, I had this talk with a family recently, and she was awesome. I love this mom, and she's like, it stresses the child out. The child can't do homework, and I said, can the child do the work at school?
Yep.
She said yes. I said, okay, and the child can't do the work at home. No. And we broke it down, and it was the mom's stress, the mom's anxiety about kind of fear of failure for the parent about working through the homework. And I don't know if you and Robin, I don't know if you guys find that too, but so often it's not about the child, it's about the stress of families and parents feeling like we have to make this happen. We don't know how, and they put pressure on themselves. And I've encouraged parents, along with what you said, Lauren, to give a choice to kids. You know what? You have a choice. You can do this homework or not. This is what we're going to set up. But if you're not able to get this done, then just understand that you're not going to have your privilege of the game or whatever it is and keep it consistent. But I have found in the recent weeks, it's really not about the kids a lot of times. It's about the parents' stress.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then exactly, Jackie, and how they model, right? And their own routine. And I think it's really hard and they feel guilty, but they're so overwhelmed. It's kind of interesting. Lauren, how do you go about helping parents to create that in the home, the organizational skills, especially if the parents are feeling like they don't have it?
First, I try to accomplish the thing when they say to me that school is scary, and they don't tell me that school is scary. I'm like, do you find their homework intimidating? And that's what it is. They don't feel like they know how to do the math, especially math. If you say math to a parent, they're like, I'm out of here. They just don't feel like they have the skill set to help their kids. So helping them realize that they do is the first piece because you have to build the confidence in the parent there. And then you can start talking about environment because once a parent's like, okay, I've got this a little bit, then you can start looking at their home and different things like that and what works in their own schedule and routines because you also have to be careful that doesn't come across like you are judging them for something. You know, you have to say, no, I get you are wearing 10 different hats right now. You know, you're trying to be the parent, trying to do the work, you're trying to be friendly with them, you're trying to do all these things, but when it comes down to it, you also just have to be the accountability factor too. And those natural consequences are so important that what Jackie just talked about is set the limit, give the choice. If you don't do it, natural consequence will follow, and then stick to it. Don't turn around and come back and then try to get the kid out of it with a million excuses on why the homework didn't get done, for instance.
Right.
Just say, yeah, we gave you the choice. You chose not to do it. That's on you. How are you going to earn it back now? You know? And that's where parents waver and have even harder time because they do so well to a certain point and then they give in. And that's when the kid crumbles. And you wish you could like fast forward and, you know, shake magic 8 ball to them and be like, no, if you just stick with it, like this is going to work, you know, the consistency works. But it's hard because there's a lot of emotion in there too for parents.
Yeah, I think they feel a lot of guilt. They feel, you know, the worry. Just there's so much happening. And as you said, I think more that the parents get that of what's happening for them. And that's something that Jackie and I talk a lot about is kind of understanding where does it come from in you? You know, what was it like for you doing homework, you know, when you were little? What was that experience? And I think it's really interesting for them to start to look at that and examine it. And that's probably influences a lot of how they feel about homework today in working with their own child.
Yeah, and if they had a good experience, it's going to be a better experience right out of the gate. But if they had some trauma with homework in the past, or it was really something that they struggled with, you're right. It's just going to bleed into their own kids, you know, and a lot of times it's just really hard too for parents because everything is posted on some platform that's electronic. So whether it's Schoology or Google Classroom or whatever, they can't see everything. Like they're not coming home with a bunch of worksheets anymore.
Right.
It used to be like that and it was very transparent. That's kind of gone away a little bit. So parents also have to be savvy with technology to get into these platforms and kind of poke around a little bit to know what their kids are doing. And it's all ages, even in the elementary schools. So that's a thing too that I think can be harder because parents get frustrated because they're like, why isn't everything just in the same spot? I had a parent text me last night, like, how come everything's just not in Schoology? And I was like, well, it's not mandated, so some teachers use that and some teachers use something else and some teachers use paper still. So it's hard for parents to keep track of all of that, especially if the kid is struggling in that area too. So the best thing in a case like that is to try to make it as visual as you can, to pull out all the information from what's online, put it down, even if it's on different post-it notes, and just make it visual. Like, I have this for math, I've got this for social studies, I have this. Now let's put it like on a poster board or on a bulletin board. I see people put on whiteboards or the refrigerator, whatever works for you and the family, to just come up with a schedule. And then that can transfer over to family life too. You can schedule out your whole family life, and that will be modeling the exact same skills that can transfer back and forth then from homework and then things beyond that.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there. We take for granted that parents don't know how to navigate all this. A lot of times kids don't know how. Robin, we joke, a lot of times we'll hear educators and people say to kids, just ask us when you need help. Just let us know if you need anything. My favorite is specialized study groups and study halls. And the teacher will say, do you need anything? And most of the kids Lauren and I work with, they're like, no, we're good. We're good. We're good. Leave us alone. Like, we're over here playing a video game. A lot of times it is about kind of asking, like, what are you understanding me to say? What are you working on? Like, you need to tell me verbally back what's going on, because a lot of our kids will hide, right? They'll kind of hide and they'll say, no, we got it. It's all done. And the parents will be like, wait a minute. We just found out like 3 weeks have gone by and you haven't done your work. So a lot of times it is about teaching those skills and really like communicating with them. And I haven't met a child that doesn't work well once there's a relationship. If I can get a relationship or connection with the child, we can make stuff happen. If that doesn't happen first, I don't think the other stuff, I think we just see frustration and I think we see kind of retreat. But when you can really connect to a child and like exuberate, like, I feel confident in you, I believe that you can make this work, it really does turns out well.
100%. And that's always, I tell my staff that too. I'm like, if you do nothing else today, make a connection with the kid. If you do nothing else, like if today's not a day where academics can happen because that child is not in that place, fine, find something out about them, because then you can use that to get in. But it's so important. Just having a conversation up front and learning something about that child goes forever because they remember that. So then you're not just like the scary teacher anymore, the scary adult. Now you've got a rapport that they can come back to and be like, oh yeah, that person helped me or talked to me or smiled at me, whatever. Those little things are huge for kids.
Yeah, that connecting part. And we know research shows what that does. I mean, that's the key in terms of trauma and repair. And in those situations is really connecting to others. And I agree with you. I think in the school settings and when we're working with students, really trying to make that connection is so important.
And it's not that hard, like it doesn't take that long. And I think people get so overwhelmed with things and think I have so much to do. You do have all those things to do and you do have all those responsibilities, but if you don't make that connection, none of those other things are going to go well. So just pause and do the first thing first,
So one of the biggest things Robin and I were talking about is we're seeing that a lot of kids are being labeled, they have low frustration tolerance. What do you think about that? As well as anxiety about homework?
Yes. So I go two ways about this. Sometimes half of them, I shouldn't say half, but a lot of kids are actually perfectionistic. The other half of kids think they're going to fail. So you're dealing with very rigid thinking on those two ends. And then some kids fall along the middle somewhere. But if you can figure out what's making them tick, it's normally one of those two things. Like they don't think they're going to do well enough, or they don't even start because they never think they're going to get to where they want to be. So you have to kind of find a middle ground with it, but you also have to use the failure in a positive light. So instead of highlighting it as like you didn't do well or writing with a red pen on things or little things like that, you actually have to use that failure as an opportunity. Like you were saying earlier, it doesn't always have to be negative. A lot of times it leads to a lot of positive things. We know that from famous people or people who are super successful in all types of different like business and trades and teachers, whoever. That's where they learn the most, is when they failed at something so they can make it better. So I think we have to tackle that piece of it. And then learning to trust yourself as a student, I think, is another thing. I think low self-confidence has a piece in this too. So if you can somehow highlight strengths, even if they're really, really little, just to get them boosted a little bit so that they can actually trust that they can do things and that they did learn this and that they were paying attention, or if they weren't, they need help, find and ask for help. And that's really scary to kids. And they're not going to always ask you. So it might be very quiet and everyone looks like they're doing their work. I bet you more than half of those kids actually need help with something. So that helps actually reduce frustration times when they're not with you. If you can read them while they are with you and push into it to provide support so that they know that's okay. Because also kids think that they're a burden. So if they're frustrated really, really fast, they may not show it at all, or it goes into the opposite direction and then it's a super loud behavior. It kind of just depends on the kids, but it's because of whatever their internal processes are in their brain though, and how they think about themselves a lot of the time.
Don't you think, one thing I noticed is before the pandemic, and I would say, Lauren, probably 7, 10 years, right when we started working together, there was a huge push in
Yeah.
schools for test scores and AP and honors, and every kid had to be smart and gifted. And I think we lost our way a little bit in terms of, kids develop at different ages. And I say this to parents all the time, your kid might be 18 and emotionally 14. It's okay. Like, kids develop at different
Mhm.
paces. And I think we have to realize that it's not all about test scores and achievement, that it really is about building that resiliency and helping kids emotionally feel confident in themselves. That some of the kids Lauren and I, Robin, have worked with that have struggled the most have become the most successful. And so we know that test
Mhm.
scores are not an indicator of adult success. I can't say enough. If you're a parent listening and your child struggles with school and homework, that is no way an indicator of success. And you have to, as a parent, sometimes reflect on that, share with them that there's so many other ways you can be successful. And I think the biggest thing we do to kids that is not great is we judge their performance and we judge, who
Mhm.
they are as human beings based on their achievements and how they kind of go through life in terms of scores and things like that. And that's not an
Mhm.
indicator at all. So I love Lauren's approach in that it really is about helping the child where they're at and helping them find themselves. And then they're going to go on cruise control and they're going to become their own
Mhm.
person. I just had a kid recently that he's going to get his GED, but he's working and he's already set in his career path and he's passionate about what he's doing. And I really believe he's going to be successful.
And he will be. The kicker about teaching is that all day long, teachers do all this lesson planning to differentiate and to meet the kids where they're at. And then we tell them to go take a standardized test. And then we look at that score and we're like, what are we doing? To your point, why do we differentiate everything and make it click? And then we don't give them something that can measure it. A long time, I mean, years ago, a lot of people did a really good job of switching away from not total standardized testing, but testing in school. So instead of just giving you a multiple choice test, like, I'm going to let you do a project that you can show it creatively that you have mastery of this skill. And that was great because that's what we were doing. That's what we were spending our time doing. And kids were doing well with that. So it all
Mhm.
has to match all the way through. And I mean, it's interesting, right? Like,
Yeah.
your test score is not there, your SAT's not there, but who cares? Because they're still going to be successful because their brain is amazing. It's just in a different way. They just don't do well on tests.
Right. I think it is so interesting, that whole mastery of skill versus being able to regurgitate the information. And what we really want to see when we look at successful kids is that they do have that mastery of skill. And I think it's just so interesting that you're talking about that. I find that fascinating. Well, Lauren, what do you think, would you say are some tips that really improve a child's school habits, their motivation for school? Could you give us a few tips that listeners could take with them and really hold on to?
Yeah, I would say the biggest indicator is how involved they are in a school environment, honestly, for motivation. And that goes back to the connection piece that we've been talking about. But if they feel like they are a part of their learning environment, and when you pull kids, those of them that say yes, that I feel comfortable in school, I have an adult to go to that I trust, I feel like I have a peer group, that motivates them to get out of bed in the morning and go and see whoever they want to see and learn whatever the thing is, as long as they can be involved some way. And that's why it's so great to get involved in extracurriculars too at a young age, if you're involved in anything, because once you get to middle school, high school, you've got a lot of opportunities. But that seems to be a huge motivational piece just to form that connection, to get that there. And that's why eighth graders that do sports or marching band or dance or play something, art, whatever it is, and if they can get in the doors of the high school during the summer before their
Yes.
freshman year, that connection is so strong that they just feel like they got it. And that's how I was. When I went into high school, I was on dance team, but my freshman year, my best friends were juniors in high school because they took me under their wing that summer of eighth grade. And I felt great in the hallways. I knew faces. I had a connection with adults because I would see them already because I had been in the school for months and things like that. And it can be anything because there's so much out there, even clubs that are offered on Saturdays and things like that. So if you live in a community where you have that at your fingertips, you should definitely take advantage of it because it super helps the kids.
Yeah, I like that because I know that was one thing that I really encouraged my own kids to get involved. And even it was cross country for the summer. When they walked into that door, they knew kids and they knew upperclassmen and they had relationships and connections. It just doesn't feel as scary, right?
Yeah, yeah, and not at all. And I think the kids would tell you that too, you know, and then when that is paired with good habits of parents modeling things at home, and that can even be in their own job of how they approach calls, how they manage their time, how they organize, how they communicate at home with transparency, all of that also bleeds into school for your own child too. And just having a structure, you know, it really comes back to that. And if it's something that's a struggle and you can't do it yourself, maybe you're a single parent, do you have people around you in your network? I know a lot of people have really close family friends where family friends will come over and sit with them just to like monitor and see how their day was and do some homework, then encourage them to take a break, eat a snack, you know, make sure, because that's another thing. They don't eat, so they don't eat breakfast and then they don't think they need it, and then their brains aren't where they need to be, and then by the time they get home, if they are super perfectionistic, then they're going to do homework for 6 hours a night and then they don't eat dinner, and it's just a really vicious cycle. So I think there's a lot to it. So the healthy habits, if those can be modeled and people can help you if you need that help, then ask people. And a lot of people are more than willing to support.
Well, and Lauren, I know your go-to kind of phrase is don't sweat the small stuff. Like in the moment, if nothing else, just build a connection. I mean, I love about Lauren is simplicity. Like if nothing else, just sit with the child and try to have that connection in that moment. Look at the child in the eyes and kind of connect. If you don't know what to do in the moment, like that's our best advice. We're not going to do it all. There's no perfect formula for any of this. And I think one thing that we talk a lot about is we're all in it together and we're all learning. You know, Robin and I and Lauren, we've made tons of mistakes and we learn from the kids we work with. And so, Lauren, I always love hearing from you. I mean, we do this every day and I don't think we'll ever stop. I think we love doing it. What would be, do you have any funny stories if you could end on, did your parents ever screw anything up or did they ever have like a funny story that you could be like, they totally dropped the ball, like you were supposed to go to dance and they packed a basketball uniform, or like, do you have any like funny like parent stories you can blast your parents out right now?
So not like that, but I do have funny stories, which I think actually I still remember them because they were amazing. The one, my dad was supposed to take us to see 101 Dalmatians. He won't be mad if he's saying this. And we came back from the movie theater, and my mom's like, "How was the movie? Do you love the dogs?" And we were like, "What dogs?" My dad literally took us to see White Men Can't Jump, and we thought it was the best thing ever. So inappropriate. We're so young. And my mom's trying to ask us about dogs, and we literally watched the basketball movie with a subplot of like love and passion. And they're like, "What are you talking about? We watched basketball." And like, it was hilarious. And my mom was like, "What just happened?" You know, and my dad's just like giggling. And if you're my dad, he's like a huge teddy bear. But he has this giggle that makes you giggle, and he was just laughing. We did bring my mom home popcorn that day, though, and that was her thing, because when she was pregnant with us, she would crave popcorn. So my dad would stop on the way home from work and go into the movie theater just to buy her popcorn and bring it home. So it was a little bit of a padding that day, but that was a good one. And then he used to tell us that the Ninja Turtles lived on Lower Wacker Drive, and we would drive down there all the time, and he would stick his hand out the side of the window and hit the roof. And so it would make sounds like the Ninja Turtles were on the roof. My brother would love it because that was his thing back then. And you're like, "No, it's Ninja Turtles." And we all felt, I mean, we fell for it, but it was just fun, you know? And I think that's the thing, is that like, you just have to have fun with your kids sometimes so they remember those things. And then it's just a good rapport. So when you do need help in other things and things are stressful, you can go to them, you know, because you giggle, and some things are funny and some things are rough. But yeah, it was good growing up. So I can't complain.
Well, I'm excited, and I know we will continue to work together because we have about 1,000 families that are requesting our services, and you know, Robin, I know you too. I know you're in Kansas, and we're here in Illinois, but we truly love what we do, and I think that's what makes it fun because we don't see kids as challenging. You know, we see it as an opportunity, and I really think that that's kind of our motto, and it will continue to be.
Yep, I agree 100%.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you guys for having me on. It's so fun, and I'll come back anytime you need me.
Oh, you'll be back, and I will probably see you very soon, considering that we are partnering on a lot of kiddos. So I will see you
It's
soon.
exciting. Yeah, making differences. That's what it's about.
Yes,
So
yes.
let those little light bulbs go off. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for our listeners.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Jackie. Thank you for joining us. And make sure to subscribe and like us to catch our next episode, where we will take you on a journey to find new ways of successful parenting.